I know what you're thinking, Wolcen, in 2023. But hear me out on this one. I'm not saying that all of a sudden the game is amazing, although I do think it's pretty good. I'm not saying there aren't any issues anymore, although the game-breaking bugs are gone, it seems. I'm not saying you should play this over any other ARPG this year, although you could and feel good about it. I'm just making the point that Wolcen is these days a much better game. But more so, if you still have this in your library, maybe just reinstall it and enjoy yourself, like I did. And if you're interested in ARPGs, consider subscribing to the channel. The last couple of months, I played around 100 hours of Wolcen, created the character from scratch, turned that into a necromancer and completed all endgame. You're looking at 217 difficulty endgame with 5 modifiers, the most difficult content currently available as of January 2023. I feel that the 100 hours are a decent representation actually. I feel you can probably, in the current state, enjoy Wolcen for around this time, and after that there isn't much reason to play any further. Nothing wrong with that, but just managing your expectations here and what you should expect out of Wolcen's endgame. I'm going to skip most of Wolcen's history, we all know it. If you still feel betrayed by the team somehow or have resentful feelings towards the game, I guess I can't blame you, and neither can I convince you to play this again. I do think that, sometimes people do deserve a second chance, but hey, that's just me. But if you're willing to forget about the past, recognize that ever since Wolcen launched, the developers kept working on it, released multiple massive patches, and are trying to make Wolcen a better game, then this video is for you. I'll go over the positives and the negatives. Starting with the positives. Wolcen is by far the prettiest ARPG out there, still after almost 3 years. The graphical fidelity is off the charts, the lighting in some of these maps, the particle effects, the fog, the animations and the sound effects and music. It's absolutely top notch. You put down a turret and it starts blasting, it fills me with joy, like it's filling the enemies with lead. You don't play ARPGs typically because of the graphics, but when they are as good as in Wolcen, it does make a game more enjoyable. And the game runs well too. Performance was always great for me on the highest setting, even while streaming or recording. Then atmosphere or ambience. This is very subjective, but I enjoy the world Wolcen has created, whether it is the imperial architecture, the magic schools or the layout of the maps. I always had the feeling I'm part of this weird techno-punk fantasy world where magic and technology meet, and I feel the devs nailed that aspect of the game. Controller support. Wolcen has, hands down, the best controller support in any ARPG that I've played. Controller support was added in August 2022. I play PoE with a controller sometimes, it's pretty bad because the game is so complicated. I play Last Epoch with a controller, which is fine. I played Warhammer 40k Inquisitor Martyr recently with a controller. It's not too bad, but you can't swap between controller and mouse and keyboard on the fly. And Wolcen, that is so good. And for someone who's been playing ARPGs for 30 years, I have to think about my wrists, so a controller is great. You can also easily swap between controller and mouse and keyboard, so if you do want to do inventory management, you can still use mouse and keyboard. But it isn't required, because Wolcen isn't that complicated. There aren't that many menus, options or other things you have to worry about. It is all rather straightforward. I didn't play the campaign this time, so I can't really talk about that. There used to be some pretty bad bugs in there, but to my knowledge, most of them got fixed. More so, when I used to play the game like a year ago, the game was still buggy as hell. I got stuck constantly into the expedition maps while dodging. The game crashed, mobs didn't spawn, objectives couldn't be completed, it was a mess. All of those bugs are fixed. I didn't crash in 100 hours. I didn't have a single game-breaking bug. I didn't get stuck once doing hundreds of maps. As a matter of fact, I didn't have that many bugs at all, and definitely not ones that I can remember at the moment. This was some big criticism I had back in the day, saying that Wolcen at its core is a fine game, but the bugs are ruining it. Without the bugs killing the game, it turns out Wolcen is indeed a fine game, so there you go, I'm putting it up as a positive. Another aspect I quite enjoyed was the overall variety in the endgame, by which I mean the expeditions and consumables. Since January 2022, the game has a war table offering 3 random expeditions for you to do, plus endgame content in the form of consumables. The latter use items that sometimes drop the consumables, and you get loaded into an instance with extra loot beetles, which are loot goblins basically, or a cave with cursed chests, or a reimagining of a campaign boss fight at higher difficulty. You can also craft some of these consumables in your city. They're fun little missions and offer decent rewards. The meat of the endgame, what you will be doing most of the time, is the 3 random expeditions offered to you. There are around 6 or 7 types of expeditions. Some are quite similar, like Onslaught and Headhunt, which place you into a small circular cave and you have to kill a bunch of enemies. Others are much more elaborate, like the Wrath of Cyricel, where you're being haunted by special enemies until you kill the boss, and all the loot is then collected into one final chest. This also allows you to play a smooth, zooming playstyle because you don't have to loot until the end. The loot there has special affixes, which lets you use skills you otherwise wouldn't be able to, like melee skills on a gun, for example. My favorite expedition mode was added by the Blood Trail update, which was released in December 2020, where you're chasing a prey, building that prey and giving it modifiers, and finally fighting and defeating that prey, so it drops special loot with tributary affixes. Affixes that have a big upside but also a big downside. It is a cool game mode and super fun to do in endgame. Once again, the rewards are definitely worth it. Plus, the maps itself are varied, fun, beautiful, and hold quite some random events, making it interesting and keeping it fresh. Dungeons exist within each map and they're rewarding and fun to do, although for some reason the monsters killed inside of it don't count towards the level completion. Cursed chests spawn a bunch of monsters, but also offer great rewards. There are several shrines, the occasional loot beetle, plenty of corpses and chests to loot, and that's actually worth doing because the rarity and quantity on those things is significant and it all adds up. It may ultimately not pull you in for hundreds of hours. I don't think there is enough variety and content for that per se, but there's definitely plenty to keep you entertained while grinding it out on a new character for 50 or 100 hours. And more content is still being added, with a new Chronicle on the way this year. The final system that I'd like to highlight is an old system, one of the oldest, but still a decent progression loop. It is the city building that you do. It's a gold sink and primordial essence sink. It allows for some upgrades, some income, random gear, transmutations, and plenty of other features like cool cosmetics you unlock within the game. It's nothing special, but you do have a sense of progression here, and add to that the progression of your character and difficulty progression to 217, and there's quite a bit to grind for. Because there's plenty of variety, like I already described, I feel Wolcen Endgame is in a decent spot right now. Then, some negatives. I feel that Wolcen still can do a lot more when it comes to builds and clarity. I played a minion build after minions were overhauled in the Arise update from July 2021 and tried to figure out without any guides how to scale minions. It is very unintuitive. I ended up just adding random gear and points in the passive tree and then look at how the tooltip DPS changed, and only by doing that I figured out which stats were important and which didn't do a single thing. It's a total crapshoot really, to figure out which major nodes in the passive tree apply to minions and which don't. Trying to find any consistency or logic there is pretty much impossible. For me, that is not a massive issue. I will figure it out at some point, and I'm not much of a build maker anyway. But if you are, and that is one of the most enjoyable aspects of a game like this for you, you may get very frustrated with the lack of information here. Similarly, I don't care much for balance in an ARPG. I don't believe an ARPG can ever be balanced, so let's just have some fun, right? Not everyone agrees though, and if you are susceptible to balance issues, then maybe Wolcen isn't the game for you. Minions were fine, it seems balanced to me, but I can't speak for any other skill or archetype currently, and I do know it's a common criticism on this game, and probably warranted, although it should be said that the game has seen several balance updates since launch. Then, crafting, it just seems absolutely horrible. I didn't put too much effort into it, but the sheer RNG and pointlessness of it all doesn't incentivize me either. On the flip side, it means that drops are most likely to be your main source of improving gear or transmuting stuff. And that's actually what happened for me. I found most of my upgrades from the monsters, or I transmuted it, and I suppose that's fine too. It is the opposite in that sense of PoE, where dropping an upgrade is an illusion, pretty much. And there's a loot filter available too, it is pretty good. It would be great if it would do the specific affixes from the Wrath of Circel and the Prey, but yeah, you can't have it all, I suppose. Another thing is that it is unclear in which chronicle you are, especially on older characters. If you give Wolcen another go, make sure to make a new character so you actually have all of the chronicles available to your character. Old characters are stuck in old chronicles and as a result are missing a lot of content. And finally, the development base. It's clear that despite Wolcen being impressive on many fronts, the dev team has always been struggling when it comes to updates and bug fixes. Some game-breaking bugs existed for months or even years if you count the alpha. Wolcen doesn't get many content updates either, maybe 1 or 2 a year. Purely because of this, there's always a real risk that when a new update drops, it has massive bugs, which won't be solved for months. Other than this, I don't see too many negatives anymore. I'm fairly neutral on things like the campaign or the story. I enjoyed the campaign back in the day. If you've played the campaign once, you can skip it. I think that's cool. So let's draw a conclusion here. Should you play this game? I think Wolcen can sustain a player base that jumps into the game every 6 months or so, lasts for 50 to 100 hours, and then you just put it away again, waiting for the next chronicle. And if that is what Wolcen ends up being, all things considered, that is probably fine. In fact, that seems to be happening now, with a 200 concurrent player number on Steam. I feel there's a good chance these aren't the same 200 players, but people remembering that they had Wolcen installed are curious what became of the game and are pleasantly surprised with the current state of the game. People like me, basically. Because by ironing out all the game-breaking bugs, like being stuck in a map, crashes or random other bullshit, Wolcen can actually be enjoyed as intended. Yeah, it took the devs almost 3 years to reach this point, which is definitely bad, and Wolcen may never recover from eternal ARPG meme status, but if you just forget about the whole history and the disaster Wolcen used to be, it's hard to deny that these days, at the very least, it is a decent game. I would even say it's good. So maybe, like me, you should give Wolcen another chance. It may surprise you. Or if you haven't, buy it once it is on sale. You'll get your money's worth, for sure. And that's it. Thanks for watching and making it to the end. I appreciate it. See you soon. Love you all. Bye bye.